You're listening to Phenomenology Club Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Talk About It, the official podcast series of Phenomenology Club. All of these episodes are broadcasted live to our Patreon audience. If you would like to be a member, you can sign up at patreon.com/phenomenologyclub for only $1. Otherwise, you can hear them 1 week after the initial broadcast on our Spotify or YouTube pages. Enjoy. Hello all. Welcome back to another Sunday evening with Phenomenology Club. Another sleepy Sunday evening with Phenomenology Club. I'm Buttress, your wise and sleepy host, hailing to you from the forests of New Jerusalem. How's everybody doing? We are back for another topics-based discussion, as this is what we do now. And tonight, we will be following from our previous discussion about nouns, which is now live on the Spotify page and will soon be live on our YouTube page, to talk about being human beings. First of all, I would like to apologize about my recurring issues with some noise in my line. I don't know exactly what's going on. It's either my microphone or my interface, because it is not the XLR cable. So if I hear it, I will try to pause and let it pass. Let this ghost in the machine pass. Hello, Zensei. Can you hear me? Zensei said, I'm listening. I will pause and let it pass. And that's all I can really do for now, because I am not about to purchase a new microphone or a new interface for such a silly issue. Maybe eventually. I'll figure it out. I'm lazy and I'm sleepy. Welcome to Sunday evening, sleepy Sunday evening, with Phenomenology Club. How is everybody feeling? Are we feeling good? Are we feeling not good? Are we feeling black-pilled? This entire new season, quote-unquote, of Phenomenology Club, I suppose you could call it, our new era, where we return to the Talk About It topics-based series, started with a recognition of the fact that there is a problem many of us are experiencing, and that problem is the feeling of black-pilledness that has permeated many of us to our utter core. In my case, my issue, the most black-pilling thing for me, was my recognition that I feel as if humans are a group of people who, in my mind, I associate with what they have accomplished. That thing being our grand civilization. And upon realizing that I may not admire our civilization as much as I previously did, once I've been made to behold the many failures of this creation, the thing we call civilization, this has been devastating. However, even in listening back to the past 2 episodes, I feel as if I have begun to identify the problem and already am beginning to see a solution, which I'm going to share with you all. Maybe tonight, maybe not. We'll see how it goes. And this is relevant also to the logical trajectory we're taking together here. When we first started thinking about civilization, and why perhaps feelings of civilization upset many of us in the now, when the civilization we live in appears to be crumbling. And that feels even more poignant this week, of course, as we now are in the midst of a conflict we're witnessing between 2 countries that may escalate to such a point that the world will feel its ramifications in a very serious way. And what we talked about the past 2 weeks is how a lot of these issues can ultimately be reduced to language, in a sense, because language is the thing that creates the concepts that we use to describe our experience of being in the world. How sad we feel, how happy we feel, optimistic, negative, war, love, language. These are all concepts that only exist through and are reinforced through language. And of course they evolve, but they evolve through endless discourse, which is also language. So this is what we're doing. Discoursing about discourse and discoursing about language. Last week we talked about nouns, and I proposed an idea I have where I stated that I feel as if nouns, which we define as words which often include determiners and another noun, I stated how I believe nouns kind of seem to have a faulty mechanism at times, and I wanted to clarify exactly why I care, because I don't think that I was clear enough necessarily. When I used my example of, well, I gave quite a few examples of nouns that I find to be treacherous and why. I give the example woman, which I said is a female human, and how I feel that because we're always dividing people into these categories of women, female humans, and men, male humans, we create and reinforce a psychological binary where we group all humans according to these two categories that of course are very relevant in medical and biological settings, but not so relevant when it comes to much else. And I wanted to state that the reason I care and the reason that I think this is an issue is not necessarily outright political, though of course many of these examples, especially the one I just used, has many political ramifications for obvious reasons. I also used the example of Christians and Muslims. These are also political examples, and perhaps I should not have offered such political examples, because the problem, I think, even devoid of our political reality, would still be a problem. This problem of nouns that essentialize properties to become stand-ins for something. I feel that this creates a warped perception of the world that is not bigoted necessarily, though it certainly can become bigoted, but is irrational. I don't believe it is rational to reinforce a psychological reality where you are made to feel as if some of these properties are more important than they are in actuality. I gave the example of a common sentence where someone will say that woman is crossing the street. What that sentence means is that person with a vagina or whatever, that female person, that person with a female reproductive system is crossing the street. If I'm constantly reinforcing this kind of psychological attitude with my language, my feelings, my affects are going to follow from this kind of categorization. However we choose to categorize and describe the world with our language absolutely does reinforce psychological realities about the world. And the more we reinforce ones that are arbitrary, that are useless, we are swaying ourselves in ways that are almost kind of spiritual, it feels like, and completely inconsequential to any sort of realistic description of the world or rational description of the world. If we know that some of these parameters are arbitrary, then we should seek to make our speech more neutral so that the resultant affect is also more neutral. You understand what I'm saying? Zensei is on a walk. So this is not in the interest of protecting certain categories of people, though of course this becomes relevant, but it is more about seeing the world quote unquote accurately. And of course there's no true accurate way to see the world, but I would hope that most of us do want to create a description of the world with our language that is somewhat accurate, because this is the entire mode of language, period, right? It seeks to be somewhat symbolic. So, if we're using language to symbolize real-world phenomena in the world, I think that we should try our best to structure it in such a way where we are not creating exaggerated emotional attitudes and psychologies and whatever. We should seek to create a language that is quote-unquote rational. So I don't know if I described that well as I'm Sleepy Butchers on Sleepy Sunday, but I tried. Let me give another example, actually. Grace Garfield says, an unbiased view of the world? Yes, Grace, sort of. I mean, for one, I don't believe it's possible at all to have a view of the world that is completely unbiased in any capacity, you know? However, it's very obvious, I think, that we have a lot of biases in our language, and I don't mean bias in the sense that it's biased against women or biased against gays or whatever the hell, although this is also true, but biased in the sense that it holds some sort of logical weight, which is really the only definition of biased, or the main definition of biased. I have an upload about it in this channel if you want to watch it. But yes, I would say that the goal is to create something less biased, because again, I give the example of if we chose instead to divide everybody into blonde hair and brown hair instead of men and women, it sounds weird, it feels weird to us if we were to start doing it out of nowhere. But the next generation of people, if this is how they are taught language and how to categorize the world, it wouldn't seem weird to them at all. We acclimate to whatever we create with our language, so it's up to us if we want to undo stupid decisions like deciding to divide all humans into these two arbitrary categories of people with female reproductive systems and people with male reproductive systems, even outside of any sort of institution where this would matter, or setting where this would matter, rather, such as the medical and biological sciences. The fact that we choose to describe people doing arbitrary actions like eating food, crossing the street, doing this, doing that, as either having a male or a female reproductive system really sounds kind of ridiculous, and is ridiculous the more you think about it, and is no less ridiculous than separating the world into blonde and brunette people. And again, this is not being argued because of some sense of political justice, even though that is what led me to this realization. But it's a recognition of the fact that this is kind of stupid. This is really stupid, and the fact that it doesn't feel stupid bothers me, because I want stupid things to seem stupid. You know what I'm saying? The fact that it doesn't feel stupid bothers me, and I think is testament to what I'm trying to argue. That anything, no matter how stupid, how irrational, that we create with our language, we will become acclimated to. If we decided again to divide the world into blonde people and brunette people, it would not feel stupid if you grew up this way, but it is stupid. So if we recognize something is stupid, but it doesn't feel stupid, we should make it feel stupid. You see what I'm saying? Because if not, then we're stupid, okay? Grace, I agree. I think it's impossible to be unbiased. There's lots of filters that we can take down to see the world more realistically. Absolutely. It's for certain not possible to have any sort of neutral perspective on the world. This is just simply logistically impossible, as the world is only experienced through individuals subjectively. However, especially as we use language as the common neutral quote-unquote meeting ground where we all exist in some proximity to this language and these concepts, we want to create the most neutral language possible so that it's not weighted with all of this irrational bias that complicates things like thinking in language, coming up with good rational philosophies, coming up with rational thought itself. you know? Because think about it. If this language that we're using is so steeped in all of these dumb biases that are just illogical, not sound, not rational, we just have decided where we want to emphasize this or that trait of personhood or objecthood. This is the same exact language we use to create philosophy. This is the same exact language we use to create our natural sciences. This is the same language we use to create everything. Civilization itself, as we talked about last episode. So if this is what we have to shape the world in all these various ways, then why are we not more invested in perfecting it to the best of our abilities? Language itself is a philosophy in and of itself, in a way, and it's the philosophy that we all use to communicate to each other and also to ourselves, our mutual experience of being in the world. So we need to make this shit as good as possible. It's not arbitrary. I don't want to be speaking in poems and parables out here when I'm trying to have a serious fucking discussion. You understand me? People like, yes, language is colorful and we use it for poems and this and that, and that's wonderful, and that has its own place. But when we're using everyday speech, this shit should be treated as a science, because it is. And if there's dumb shit in my speech and my science with how I describe the world, I want to fucking fix it. Lady Grinning Soul says, why define human biases as irrational and arbitrary? Then why have humans? Well, Lady Grinning Soul, I'm definitely not saying that human biases are irrational or arbitrary. I'm saying that some of the biases that we have incorporated into human language are arbitrary. And of course, I'm talking only about the English language because that's the thing we're all mutually speaking and thinking in right now. Other languages don't have these kinds of biases that I'm talking about right now. And other languages have biases that we don't have. Language is, or can be conceptualized almost like a structure of Legos. Every word is its own Lego. And we realize, I think in retrospect, often after building a structure, that perhaps this was a bad idea, I'd like to redesign this, why don't we refortify this area, etc., etc. So I'm not saying that humans ourselves are irrational, though of course we have the capacity to be, but I don't even think a human can even really be described as irrational. A human can only participate in an activity that becomes irrational. Humans ourselves, I don't think, are necessarily rational or irrational. But speaking of humans ourselves, let's get a little bit into the topic. First of all, I left last week with a homework assignment. I wonder if any of you completed it, where I asked to please bring me a noun similar to the examples I gave. Examples like Muslim, meaning person who practices Islam, Christian, person who practices Christianity, woman, female human, man, male human, intelligence, human intelligence. I asked to bring a noun like this, which includes a determiner and also another noun. And this is why the noun exists. If you have one for me, please present it to the chat. Because there are a plethora of examples of these kinds of nouns that I believe become easily problematic, quote unquote, and are loaded with bias. Something I said to Zensei when we were talking about this after last week's episode was the Christian example. These two different phrases or words, if you say a Christian and if you say a Christian person, let's give an example. The Christian reads his Bible daily. Sentence 1. Sentence 2. The Christian person reads his Bible daily. Do these sentences not have different affects to you? Or am I crazy? I understand that this will not probably be true for everybody, but for me personally, The Christian reads his Bible daily, and the Christian person reads his Bible daily, for me, have very different internal affects. And again, this is not stated so that I'm like appealing for the personhood of the Christian and we need to recognize his personhood. That's not even why I'm saying this. But when I just say the Christian instead of the Christian person, the Christian to me just feels much more poetic. If I had to try and explain it, feels more like a Lord of the Rings race, like a mystical being, the Christian, instead of the Christian person, which grounds me more in my understanding of human people. It's evocative of that image of a human person. When I say the Christian, I think of like a knight kneeling with like his chainmail. I swear to God. And of course, maybe that's just a me problem, but I feel like other people probably can relate. The Christian is just more poetic language. And if I'm trying to paint a somewhat accurate, unbiased, neutral perspective of the world so that I can make sense of it, I don't want poetic speak in my language. I would rather have something more neutral. Can anyone relate to this? Grace has an example. Grace's example is an abuser. Ooh, I like that. So, number 1, Grace says, a person who uses something to bad effect or for a bad purpose. Quote, notorious abusers of the English language. Number 2, a person who treats another person or animal with cruelty or violence, especially regularly or repeatedly. Abusers often control the victim's access to friends and family. Grace, I think that's an excellent example. Because it also, the word abuser, what does this essentialize? It essentializes the idea that a human is committing abuse. When you commit abuse as a human, you're now an abuser, which of course I think has a different affect when you say the abuser hit me, I don't know, or this person was abusive towards me. These have much different affects. Absolutely. The abuser almost mystifies the idea that someone has committed abuse and essentializes this idea as like a branding of somebody's personhood. Once you've committed abuse, now you are an abuser. But is this a good way to use language? If it's not even, the question isn't even about the person who has committed abuse and appealing on behalf of their personhood, it's more an appeal to myself that I not paint the world with such colorful language to myself and create irrational biases and reinforce a psychological reality that's like more poetic than it is grounded in the real natural world. You know what I'm saying? I know that humans commit abuse. I don't know that once you commit abuse, you have transcended some sort of ethereal property of existence and now become an abuser. We've talked about this before with the concept of violence. Humans are capable of committing acts of violence, but should we ever call humans violent themselves? Can a human be violent? Humans can act violently, but can they be violent? Humans can act abusively, but can they be abusers? They can if we say they can, but should we say they can? Is this useful? Or are we painting our worlds with language that is probably too colorful for our own good? This is what I'm arguing. This is only what I'm arguing. That I don't want to be steeped or suspended in some sort of psychological reality that's painted with colorful language. Colorful language, of course, I'm not saying should not exist, but perhaps we should reserve colorful language for applications like poetry and art. Something I'm very familiar with. Hey, Jay Freeburn, haven't seen you in a while. Welcome. Jay Freeburn says, person signifying noun equals verb plus ER. or ism. Okay. Ist, ism, in. Exactly. How do you feel about this process, Jay Freeburn? I feel as if it's interesting. I mean, this is actually what brings us to our topic, because when asking the question at the end of last episode, should we continue this practice? I realized, because I've been having lots of realizations, I realized that this is kind of an impossible task, I think, to eliminate this practice, because it seems like most nouns can be reduced to some sort of determinate and a noun. The word human itself, which is kind of the central idea for this entire line of inquiry, the thread between all of our continuing episodes, this word human itself also is an example of a word with a determiner built into it. A human being, right? A human is a human being. Somebody could say that human is not the most atomic noun here. But we can't just use being, because other beings are also being. Being, in this case, would be a verb. What do humans do? We be. Tamara says, let's just start calling ourselves flesh bags. Tamara, I love the word human. Let's not abandon it. Regardless, this requires more thought, but Cammie made the suggestion last week that perhaps while we ponder on this, because I don't claim to know, I'm not fucking Noam Chomsky over here, a semantics expert. I don't claim to know, but as we investigate this further, I feel like I personally am going to try my best, as I already do, to avoid essentializing nouns that describe persons. At least outside of occupations. I don't know about things like the fireman, the firefighter, the policeman. That I think is okay because they describe careers. However, the Christian, the abuser, the this, the that, I personally feel as if these words are a little too colorful for my liking. I'm going to approach them skeptically, at least for the time being, until we figure out what the fuck is going on. Can I get an amen? Jay Freeburn says, flesh bag is good because it describes the material content of the being. True, Jay, but what about all other animals? They're all flesh bags as well, right? Dogs are flesh bags. Cats are flesh bags. I don't think that would work here. I'm a human being. A cat is a cat being. Or a dog being. I feel like this is all we have to work with currently, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with classifying ourselves according to this, because a human is a biological classification already, right? It specifies exactly what species we are a part of. Anyway. Tomorrow says, I think you have a point. Every day and life in general is all about gaining and experiencing knowledge. Agreed, Tamara. I feel like as we go on with life, especially time, I feel like time for myself has really become an important variable in my life, where especially when thinking about ideas like acclimating to language and the kinds of structures we build with language, and acclimating to ideas and things, like I've said it before, but often I think we tell ourselves we know a thing before we truly know the thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, knowing a thing is not simply being confronted with the knowledge of it. It's, for lack of less colorful language, to sit in your knowledge of the thing and let your knowledge of the thing become integrated into your entire worldview. Become actually integrated and not just a thing floating on the surface of your worldview like an oily film. It has to settle. It has to settle and interact with all the other things you believe. And as time goes on, the things that you know, you come to know. So, thinking about all this idea of, thinking about all of this in tandem feels jumbled, like a jumbled mess in my head, but also like I'm starting to identify something that we talked about last episode and also the first episode, is this idea that humans love ourselves, many of us do, for what we do. And this is a common trope, a cultural trope among humans, right? People say, actions speak louder than words, for they do. And people have debates about things like having pride in who you are versus what you do. And people say, I have nothing to be proud of if I haven't done anything to accomplish whatever I am. I don't know. I'm thinking about things like being a woman. Like feminists will debate each other, being like, I'm not proud to be a woman because I didn't choose to be a woman. I'm proud because I did this, this, and this. And this idea makes perfect logical sense. However, when we are trying to address something like the massive black pill many of us have swallowed in recent years, when we realize that the thing we thought we loved about human civilization was civilization itself. When we thought the thing we loved about humanity was the civilization we built, and realized that we don't love civilization as much as we thought we did, and now start to hate ourselves because we associate ourselves with what humans do, which is build this civilization, how can we not fall into a deep void and a deep well of depression? And this had me thinking, well, what is it exactly that human beings do? Do we really only build civilizations? What is the purpose of any given thing or being? What does any being do? Bees. All humans do, really, is be. Am I right? I would still be a human if there was no surrounding civilization. And this had me thinking about, and I don't want to go into this because this is something we really need to talk about soon. I was thinking about how perhaps the very idea that we should associate ourselves with what we built is erroneous. What we should instead associate ourselves with is what we are capable of building. We have demonstrated ourselves to be so incredibly capable of amazing things. And just because the things that we built with this capability are not necessarily amazing, the fact that we are these beings that are so capable is amazing in and of itself. Can I get an amen? This brings me joy. And I don't want to go further into this idea because the idea of potential itself is something that requires much discussion. And I have to think on this. Perhaps we will discuss it next week or perhaps later in time. But for now, I want to only leave you with that joyous thought. I hope it brings you as much joy as it brings me. Let's wrap this up on a positive, beautiful note, dwelling on the idea of human capabilities and potential. Let's have our binaural meditation and then say goodnight for the evening. Breathe in. Breathe out. We, the human population, manifest that we are what we do. And what we do is be. We also manifest that despite what I just said, we will not over-identify with the things we do, and will instead over-identify with what we are, which is do things. We manifest that YouTube will stop disconnecting me in the middle of streams. We manifest that although currently we fall victim to confusion created by hidden pitfalls and treacheries in our invented English language, we will find a path to success, and we will solve the problem if one exists. Amen. Phenomenology Club signing off. Until next time, stay trippy. Good night.